You're not living now out of fear of failure, fear of not achieving what other people want you to do. You're living much more, the motive towards excellence and doing things well is now out of love for God. I want to respond out of love, to do things really well. So this transforms your motivation. And then you have new thought patterns, and the Bible talks about being transformed by the renewing of your mind. Your mind being changed, and you begin to believe different things about yourself and about the world and about priorities in this. So the new truth, here I'm summarizing the new truth and reality that you come to believe as you move into a Christian understanding of reality. Now, I've said this already, but I'm summarizing. Our fundamental worth and identity do not depend on our appearance or on our performance. And secondly, when we know that we are accepted and loved with all our imperfections, we're set free to pursue excellence without fear of failure or rejection and with gratitude to God. These are the things that in a way need to be deeply tattooed on your soul so that you see them every day on your mirror in the culture in which we live, to counter the subtle brainwashing of all those advertisements and Hollywood images that we saw at the beginning, and the performance ethic that we live with all around us, and sometimes even sadly within the church. Now, I need to say a little bit more before I get into some practical strategies of change about the biblical view of perfection. Because there is a tension in this of Jesus saying, be perfect, and then Paul going on to say, not that I have already been made perfect. So we live in this in-between world of perfection coming in the future and striving towards that now. And when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. So there is the hope of things being renewed, of us being transformed, that we live with. So the paradox in all of this, as we might call it, this is the theologians struggle in this world. We all struggle at a practical level with a paradox that Jesus says that when you become a Christian, you are a new creature. You're new, and then we say, well, I'm new, but I still have all these old insecurities. What's new about me? Now I've become a Christian. Something's wrong here. And what the Bible also tells us is that we are seen by Christ as perfect. We are clothed in his righteousness. So our basic state of sinfulness, of imperfection, is covered by Christ himself. And perfection is given as a free gift. But in this life, we still struggle with imperfection. We are, as Luther says, both at the same time, we are both justified and yet we are sinners. And therefore, Paul says, be transformed. So we live in this sort of strange, paradoxical tension. At one level, I am seen by God as perfect. At another level, he is working in me to make me like Christ. So the root of the imperfection is dealt with in our justification, but then we enter onto the pathway of sanctification, which is the transformation process. Jesus loves us so much that he's not going to let us alone just to be as we are with all our imperfection. He's going to work in us to transform us. So in Romans 12, I've referred to this already, this is Philip's paraphrase, don't conform any longer to the pattern of this world, all those influences around you. Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its own mold, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. But coming back to this again, these old habits die hard. You may become a Christian, you may put your faith in Christ, but you still find these old tapes play in your head. The old voices that you listen to are still there. The insecurity, the lack of significance, the desire to control everything, the fear of failure and rejection, the all or nothing thinking, the difficulty of accepting imperfection. So the person then needs to get to a place where they learn to live with imperfection and at the same time groan for glory, longing for the day when they will be made perfect. And this is a hard place for the perfectionist to enter into because it's the in-between world again, between the now and the not yet, between future perfection and the imperfections that we live with now. And this is, in this very last section here, I want to talk about how can we help ourselves to live with imperfection, for those of us who have some streaks of perfectionism in us. And this is just a few hints that I'm going to give you here of practical ways of living with imperfection and working towards out of the perfectionist thought traps. I think one of the first ones, I mentioned earlier that perfectionists tend to think that this is the right way to live and everyone should live this way. And it's helpful to help someone to sit down and to evaluate the pros and cons of living as a perfectionist. One psychologist, David Burns, asked one girl to reflect on both sides, and she managed to list only one advantage. It produced very good work most of the time, but as she thought about it, she listed 6 disadvantages, some of which were perfectionism made her so tight and nervous that she could not produce fine work or even adequate work at times. She was often unwilling to risk the mistakes necessary to come up with a creative piece of work, and it inhibited her from trying new things because she was so preoccupied with being safe. So being able to realistically see, how is this helping me? Is it a good thing? Is it a practically helpful thing? Is, I think, a very important. Then you begin to recognize the all or nothing patterns in one's thinking. Let me show you here a brief clip again. You can have the microphone. This is a lady who is talking with a humanistic psychotherapist, but I think it shows something of her own struggle with this all or nothing perfectionist thinking. He's trying to help her to recognize it, to see it for what it is, and to begin little by little to break out of it. I think in any sort of counseling process, it is a gradual sort of uncovering and pointing out the patterns of thinking that we have that are unhelpful and unhealthy and often sinful. And for the perfectionist, it often has to be little by little pointing it out again and again, because we find it hard to see these things in ourselves. We rationalize, we pretend that it's everyone else's problem, but it's not our problem. So recognizing the all or nothing patterns is a part of this. It's helpful too to ask someone to keep a journal of thoughts and feelings, because when you get into these very negative patterns of, I play tennis and I mess up my serve and I immediately start to crucify myself inside and think I shouldn't be playing tennis, I'm such a hopeless player. That inner game of tennis that reveals your thinking about many things in life. Just in one area, if you see it, you can often see how it happens in lots of areas in life. So keeping a journal, I think, helps you to uncover, to reflect on what is going on, your motives, your desires, your own heart. And it's obviously trying to help someone move from this idealistic, unreal world to live within the realm of reality, where people do make mistakes. They are imperfect. And you saw this lady struggling to live with that reality. She sort of knew it, but at another level there was something else in her that was driving her to live outside of reality, to be perfect in everything. And it's accepting this day by day, little by little. That's really hard, Because the perfectionists may recognize they need to change, but they say, I should be able to do it tomorrow. And I should be able to be perfect tomorrow. I don't want to have to wait a whole lifetime, and even then it not be finished until God does it in me. I want to make it happen today, tomorrow, or next week, or whenever it is. So this learning to live with the little by little, day by day, is a tough prospect. Working on small goals, I'll come back to that in just a moment to give you some examples. Overcoming the built-in resistance. Because, as I've mentioned, being in control is so important. Having things ordered is so important. There's a strong resistance to letting go of that and living with risk, living with the possibility of failure, of being your cracks being exposed, your blemishes being seen by the world. And as a Christian, obviously, we believe that the devil is a reality and that he is going to come and get in with his fiery darts at the places in our armor where we are weak, where we have certain besetting sins, whether it's lust or covetousness or unhealthy perfectionism. He will be there, and we need to resist him, put on the whole armor of God, as Paul says. Ephesians. So just to give you some examples, and I quote this book in my book because I think it's a very helpful. He gives a lot of practical strategies. There's not a lot overtly Christian in this book, but he's talking about ways to help yourself change. And I'm going to give you two examples from that, this little by little. If you recognize that you tend to be a very critical, oriented type perfectionist, then it's fine to say, I need to be more tolerant of others, but you can't measure that, and it's a pretty abstract goal. So you need to break it down into smaller subsections, like stop caring how they wash the dishes. My wife and I have an ongoing struggle over how you load a dishwasher. There's the perfect way, isn't there, to load a dishwasher? Well, one person thinks one way and the other thinks another way. Crazy little things like that, and it may be that you stop caring how someone else does it. Let them do it their way. That's a very hard thing for a perfectionist to do, because they always believe their way is right. Tolerate your spouse, your friend who's not so concerned about time arriving late. For some people that's anathema, they just cannot do that. Allow your children to make a mess. This lady I mentioned to you who wouldn't allow her children's friends into the house, eventually she was able to do it. Some parents I know who always have to be tidying up after their kids. It's a pretty hellish life if you can't tolerate some sort of disorder in your life. But this is where, if you've been single for a long time and then you get married and you begin to have children, when you've had order and structure in your life, that's where it can become very frightening, threatening. Another a different sort of goal, being less perfectionist about physical appearance, the appearance perfectionist. It might be spend no more than 30 minutes getting ready to go out in the day. That could be quite a challenge for some people who are so afraid that people will see flaws. Missing a workout in the gym. If you're very concerned to lose weight, again, you can become compulsive. Or maybe it's a guy who's wanting to build those muscles. Miss a workout would be a threatening thing. Being willing to gain 5 pounds without getting distressed about it. Maybe 5 is too much. But you get the idea here. It's trying, and this is what a good counselor would try and work with someone to help them to define small goals, to work on the little by little change. And then finally, we come to this, the optimum environment for change. It's not just about understanding the gospel, although that is the foundation of it all. It's not just about these practical strategies in the counselor's office, that may be helpful too, but it's also about the wider world in which you live that can help you to change. It's about your relationship with God, but it's also profoundly about your relationship with other people, the community in which you live. Now, the tendency for perfectionists is to tend to be more isolated. They don't want to get too close to other people, as I've said, because they might be exposed. Their imperfections might be seen. So they're wary of sharing things deeply, say, in a fellowship or prayer group in the church. They might come, but they might stay at somewhat of a distance. But belonging to a community, being alongside other people who can help you to see, to understand in the flesh what grace is about. It's about understanding that you are accepted, imperfect as you are. There's a wonderful movie called, have any of you seen this? Mostly Martha. It's a sort of sad movie in the beginning. But it's the story of a perfectionist German chef, a woman who runs a restaurant, and it is a beautiful place, immaculate. And she's alone in life. She lives in a very ordered, sort of sanitized apartment where everything's clean and nice. She sits down to a meal every night with a neatly laid restaurant-style table. There's no disorder in her life at this point. And then tragedy happens with her sister, and her sister is killed in an accident, and her, I think she's about 6 or 7-year-old niece comes to live with her. And the niece doesn't particularly like being there and causes quite a lot of disruption in this woman's life. She can't live this ordered, structured life anymore. And she has to take her to the restaurant in the evenings where the girl helps out a little bit but is there around with her. And then another disruptive influence comes into her life in the form of an Italian sous chef. Now remember, here's a German chef, Italian sous chef, and he is all Italy. He's laid back, delightful, colorful, and this movie, by the way, makes you want to eat. I'll show you a little clip in a moment. He is complete opposite in temperament from her. But he begins to, both the girl and the sous chef, they become friends in the restaurant. And they begin to disrupt subtly her perfectionist ways. And one day, the niece and the sous chef here invite her, Martha, to a meal in her own apartment, which they are going to cook. And they're going to do it their way, not her way. And she's invited to come in. And the scene you see here is just where she arrives at the door. I think that's where it begins. Somehow we need to create or help to create an environment around perfectionists that helps them to be able to tolerate mess a little more easily and imperfections and disorder. I think this is a wonderful example of a sort of what I would call a common grace example of the healing power of love in people's lives. These people loved her with all her uptightness, and they were able to accept her and just live around her in this way and gently disrupt her ways of going about things. So the healing power of love. Now, this is, of course, what God does with us. He loves us just as we are, but he also disrupts our attempts to remain in control by using the people of God, the community of believers. And it is, I think, we need to create small group structures of prayer groups, study groups, sharing groups, where we experience acceptance and grace from other people. One young woman who came to study with us at the L'Abri Fellowship in England, so you know it's a community, a study center, where the staff there would eat and study, and we had together with the students And every day we had a tradition where we would play volleyball for half an hour in the morning and in the afternoon with the traditional English tea break. It was very imperfect volleyball. None of us were professionals at all, but it was great fun, and you know how you get to know people very well when you play a sport like that. But there was one young woman who came to us whose parents were both perfectionists. She was a high school teacher, perfectionist, and she would not play volleyball because she was so terrified of making a mistake and everyone laughing at her. And for 2 months she resisted. She was there for about 2.5 months. The last couple of weeks she was there, we managed to gently persuade her to play, to take the risk of playing. And for the last 2 weeks she played every day, twice a day, and loved it. Months later she wrote back to us and said, you know, I listened to all those tapes of lectures, I listened to all the live lectures, I sat in on endless meal discussions, and I loved them all. But the thing that really changed my life was playing volleyball. Because now I take risks wherever I go in life much more easily. I'm prepared to risk failing in a way that I never was before, because you all accepted me with that risk of failure and with my flaws and imperfections. And I know that God accepts me in that same way. So it's not just, what I'm saying here, it's not just the counselor's office. That's not enough. It has to be in the context of the broader community of the people of God, of other people who love and accept us with our faults. As that young woman said, you accepted me with the worst hanging out. One other example I want to give you, you know the story of the Velveteen Rabbit. You remember the Velveteen Rabbit meets the toys in the children's nursery. The old skin horse, we are told, was balding and showing some of his seams. His tail was thin where children had pulled the hair to string bead necklaces. He had seen many other toys come and eventually break their mainsprings and pass on. But being old and wise, he knew about the strange and wonderful nursery magic. What is real? Asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender. Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle? I sort of equate those to appearance and performance. Isn't how you are made, said the skin horse. It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. Does it hurt? Asked the rabbit. Sometimes, said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. When you are real, you don't mind being hurt. Does it happen all at once, like being wound up, he asked, or bit by bit? It doesn't happen all at once, said the skin horse. You become. It takes a long time. And that's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily, or who have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. Something about being loved out of our tight, uptight, controlled existence, wanting to be God ourselves. God comes and loves us in that way, till we become shabby, a bit worn out. And then the reality of who we are is truly seen. That perfect character begins to emerge that He is trying to nurture in us. And of course, the promise of perfection, we live in the hope. And the whole of Scripture encourages us to look ahead to something new, to live with hope. I talk to my students a lot who are, many of them are idealistic when they get into the counseling process. And they get totally overwhelmed and blown away by the amount of suffering and brokenness there is in people's lives. And the danger, as we said yesterday, is that they become cynical, the opposite of idealism. And what I try and struggle to do, as I have struggled to learn myself, is to help them to learn to groan with other people. You know, Paul talks about the whole creation groaning, longing for the day when Christ will return, when we will be redeemed. The creation will be renewed. So we need to learn to groan well about our imperfections, to weep with people where we need to, but to hold on to the hope that there is a day coming when, and as Paul says, the present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed, the perfection that will be revealed in us. We who reflect the Lord's glory are being transformed into his likeness with ever-increasing glory. You have glory, you have beauty already, and the divine bridegroom is coming to make you complete in your glory, perfect in character. He will transform even our lowly bodies so that they will be like his body. So we wait, we long, we groan, waiting eagerly and patiently, as Paul says, for that day when true perfection, true reality will be revealed. Now, the structure of our services maybe is not all sort of neat packaged